Yeah. Yud Gimel Amid Aleph. So the last thing we said, we were talking about the azov, the azov that you use to dip into the blood dip into the ashes of the parah aduma, and you would sprinkle on the person who was tameh, or the utensils that became tameh. That was the azov, and we had a whole discussion exactly what was how many stems of azov start with. We said that everybody holds you're supposed to start with three stems of the azov, and the question was if you end with two. If you want, so we said if you start with three and you end with two, everyone says that's good. You start with three, end with two. Right. Three is that the stem that comes out of the plant, the azov, the thing the stalk that grows out. You have to take three of those stalks. It takes three of them, and you have to bundle them together and dip it into the water of the parah aduma, the ashes of the parah aduma, and then after you dip them in, you have to go ahead and sprinkle on the person. Morning, Jaime.
Morning.
Yeah, right. Hasot love, exactly. And sprinkle on him the ashes of the parah aduma. That's the law. That you have to take a bundle of azov, three different stems. You have to go ahead and tie together and dip it in. The Gemara, we came to a conclusion yesterday that Rabbi Yossi holds that if you do not begin, Rabbi Yossi said, we had the language of Rabbi Yossi on 13a1. Rabbi Yossi said in the Braita, if you look for Hatanya, if you look in the Braita, it's on the bottom of column 1, 13a3. 13a3, bottom column. What did you say? Vatanya, yes. Vatanya, we looked at a Braita, Rabbi Yossi Omer, excuse me. Rabbi Yossi Omer, Ezov shetchiloto shnayim. If the azov began with two stems, v'shiyorav echad, and if it was left over, if you lost, if at the end of the day you were left with only one stem, meaning if you started with three and you're left with one, so Rabbi Yossi says no good. If you started with two, it's no good. If you started with three, it's no good. It's good as long as you're left with two. You have to begin with three stems, and you have to be left with a minimum of two stems. So the Gemara said, so therefore we see differently than what we thought earlier. We had thought earlier that Rabbi Yossi holds that you only need three lechatchila. That we thought that Rabbi Yossi holds that it's like three. That comes three stuff that come out from the plant. So we thought that Rabbi Yossi held that you needed. Ideally you should start with three, but if you start with two, you'll be good. We see now Rabbi Yossi doesn't hold that way. Rabbi Yossi holds that you must start with three. So the Gemara, but the rabbis also say you have to start with three. So what's the argument between Rabbi Yossi and the Rabbanan? So the Gemara says Epoch. You have to change around the way we understand. The Gemara says Rabbi Yossi shlosha la'akev. Rabbi Yossi says you have to start with three. If you don't start with three stalks, three stems from the hyssop of the azov, it's no good. The Rabbanan shlosha la'mitzvah. The Rabbanan hold it's ideal lechatchila. You should have the three stems, but if you only started with two, the Rabbanan would hold it would still be good. And the Gemara shows v'hatanya, a support for that. The Gemara says, Ezov, shetchilato shnayim. If you started the Ezov, you only had 2 stems. You didn't have 3 stems. You didn't have 3 stalks of the Ezov. You had 2 stems, v'shiyarav echad, and you were left with 1 kosher. This is the opinion of the Rabbanan. The Rabbanan hold that if you started with 2 and you left with 1, it's kosher. That's Rabbanan. Rabbi Yosef says that's no good. You have to start with 3. The Eino Pasul, the Rabbanan hold the only time it is invalid, ad shehei tchilato v'shiyarav echad. If you began with 1 and you were left with 1, the Gemara says the Rabbanan hold that it is no good. So the Gemara is going to obviously question this. We could understand if you just told me a moment ago, if you began with 2 and you're left with 1, the Rabbanan say it's good. So how could the Rabbanan say now that it's pasul if you're left with 1? If you're left with 1, what does that mean? You started with more than 1, right? If you're left with 1, that means you didn't start with 1. That means you started with 2, minimum of 2. And the Rabbanan hold if you start with 2, even if you're left with 1, it's good. So how can we say in the same Braita that if you start with 2, you're left with 1, it's good, and then you say that it's invalid if you're left with 1? You just told me that to be left with 1 as long as you start with 2. That's what the Gemara is going to add. You're telling me if you're left with 1 stem, what do you mean? You started with 2 and then one of them fell out. One of them fell out from the bundle. You're telling me it's no good. You told me that if you're left with 1, you told me it's kosher. So the Gemara says, now we're turning the page. The Gemara says, Ela'ema, you need to say, now we're on Yud Gimel on the base. The Gemara says, Ela'ema ashetehei tchilato kishiyurav echad. We're only focusing on the beginning. When you start with the bundle, in order for it to be kosher, it had to be the beginning. Meaning, when we say it's invalid, if you start with the amount that you're allowed to be left with, that's when it's not kosher. Meaning to say, if you start with 1, that means you started with the amount that you're allowed to be left with. But if you did that, that's not kosher. If you start with 2, it means you started with a bundle. So then even if 1 falls out, it's normal that things fall out, let's say of the bundle during the time that you're always dipping in and you're sprinkling. It's normal that something should fall out. The Rabbanan say that does not invalidate the process. You can still use that 1 that's left over from the bundle. You don't have to go ahead and get another one. But if you started with 1, it was never a bundle. So the Rabbanan hold that 2, as long as you have 2 stems tied together, that's called a what? That's called a bundle. Now, so therefore, by having two, that would be considered. If you have 2, that's considered. Even though ideally the Rabbanan also agree, there's a chatchila. The ideal is to start with 3. You definitely, if you go to the rabbi says you should start with 3. But if you started with 2, you're good. And even if you lost 1, eventually you're still good. And just to the way they explain this Azov, you were asking a little bit about the Azov. Right. It's a grouping, right? You see, they say when we say you need three gevolim, you need this. The gevol is the central stalk. And that it contains the seeds. we're containing the seeds, the seeds. So that's the givol. Okay. So now the Gemara says the following. Darash Merema. We have on 13b1. Hani isuraita de surah. The bundles of surah. In surah, they would bundle the reeds together, and they would sell them in the market. Let's say you have a bundle of 25, you have a bundle of 50. They would bundle the reeds together, and they would sell them. Now, our Mishnah stated that you can't use bundles. You can't place bundles of wood on top of your sukkah. And we said yesterday, the Tosfos says how much is a bundle? 25 pieces. And I looked up in the Shulchan Aruch, that is the halacha. If it's less than 25 pieces bundled together, it's not a problem. It's only the problem is, right, Mr. Batesh? And we were talking about how many pieces of wood, what's the halacha? Rashi says if you're buying 3 pieces, it's a problem. Tosfos says it's only if you have 25 pieces, it's a problem. So the halacha is clear. Shulchan Aruch only brings Tosfos' opinion. Shulchan Aruch only says if it has 25 pieces. That means a minimum of 25 pieces of reeds that are tied together would be the problem of if you put that as schach on top of the sukkah. Up to 25, you're good. 25 or more, it's an issue. And yet the Gemara here said that the bundles in surah, the bundles of surah are allowed to be used. Now the question is, what's unique about the bundles of surah that we say you could go ahead and one assignment, you could place a bundle of these reeds that were tied together in surah, even if it had 25. So what does the Gemara say? So the Gemara says, Mis'afagav de Agdan, even though they tied, the seller tied this bundle together, but nevertheless, it's allowed to be used to put on the sukkah without untying it, right? You could go ahead and leave it tied on top of the sukkah. Why? Because the minyana, technically, we'll see. The minyana ba'almahu da'agdan. The reason why he tied it was it's not like a person ties it for the purpose of maybe he's going to store it away and as a possible type of bundle that people will store away. Because a bundle that people might store away and dry out, that type of bundle you can't place on top of the sukkah. But if you're going to allow a person to take a bundle and place on top of the sukkah, maybe maybe a few weeks ago, he had a sukkah that he threw some bundles on to dry out. And then he's going to say, if you're going to allow him to use this sukkah, today's sukkah with the bundles on top, even though he placed today's bundles for the purpose of stock, he might use the old bundles, the old sukkah that he placed the bundles to dry out. But these bundles of surah are not made to dry out. Because if a person, the only reason why he tied it was to know how many pieces of wood are in this bundle. Right. So the material is kosher schach. The issue here is this considered a bundle that we have to be concerned that if you allow this bundle, then they're going to allow other bundles. So you say over here, you don't have to worry about this bundle. Why not? Morning, Michael. Because there's certain types of bundles of reeds that people bundle together for the purpose of storage, and there's certain type of bundle together for the purpose of counting. Let's say, I don't know, in the bank, they have these rolls of pennies. So you put in 50-cent pennies and rolls of quarters, $10 of quarters. Is it you're rolling it because you want to store it there, or you're rolling it because you want to know how many quarters is there? And a guy goes to the bank, you buy quarters. The reason why you buy it because you're going to open it up. You're not buying the quarters to leave it in the morning, Mr. Silverman, morning, David. You're not leaving it in the bundle, and then you're going to get it and you're going to rip it open, put it into the register to be able to for the customers. So the same thing over here. This bundle of wood from Surah, they would not. If the person would want to use it for drying purposes, he would untie the bundle. This is not a type of wood that you would leave bundled. The only reason why you bundle it is because you want to go ahead and what? You want to go ahead and count how many pieces, how many, this is 25, this is 50. And since it's not the common thing, these bundles were not, I can't tell you what was unique about this wood of surah that they would always make, maybe it needed extra air, if you want to dry it out, you would need to go ahead to open the bundle if you would dry it out. This type, it's not good enough to just leave a bundle. They need extra airspace and by opening up the thing. So therefore, since no one would store these bundles, no one would store them tied together. They would always be untied. So therefore, you don't have to worry. You're not going to worry that the person is going to place these on the sukkah to dry out. And therefore, somebody who goes ahead and uses this for schach, for the purpose of schach, he does not need to untie this bundle. If you look at the Rashi, the Rashi says, we are on Yud Gimel Amud Beis. So the bundle that we're worried about it's the type of bundle that a person will go ahead and leave in its bundle, for a period of time to dry out. But here, this is not the common thing to do. So the Gemara says, and Amar Rav Abba says, Hani Sarifi de Urvani. We're now on Yud Gimel Amud Beis. If you have the Sarifi de Urvani, Sarifi de Urvani is a hut made out of aravot. So if you made a hut out of aravot, so it's made out of willows. So willows is technically kosher schach, right? It will be a kosher schach because it originally grew from the ground, and it's not attached to the tree, and it's not mekabel tuma. It's not receiving tuma. Kivan, now Rashi says, the hunters, people who would hunt birds, they would hide in this type of, they would make a hut made out of willow, and I presume it's like a camouflage, that the birds don't really think there's anybody inside, right? It's like it's in a willow, it's like you're like in a bush, so to speak. You made this this willow. This is man-made. The man-made hut made out of willow, and kivan shehutra rashi madan, and it was tied. It was tied on the top, and it was tied on the bottom. This, if you look at the picture on page 13b1, the picture number 5. You have it? It's picture number 5. You see the picture, Mr. Habe? You see the picture? So you see it's tied on the top and it's tied on the bottom. So it resembles a bundle. This is more than 25. You have more than 25 pieces of a ravot tied together. So what's the halacha? But once you untie, once kiva shutra roshi madana shalahem, if you untie the top, the upper knot, top knot is untied, then we say kisherim. Then you could use it as schach. Okay? Now remember, what did our Mishnah say? Our Mishnah says, if you want to go ahead and take a bundle and use it for schach, what you got to do? You got to untie the bundle, right? Because if now once it's untied, it's no longer a bundle, right? That's what you got to do. To here, the Gemara says, if you untie the top, even though you didn't untie the bottom, you could still take this type of thing and throw it and use it for schach. You could go ahead and take this this item full of the willows that are together, and you can go ahead and use it as schach.
The intention of it. And now untie this.
Again, here you when you're placing it on the sukkah, you're placing it on the sukkah. It's already, we're considering this untied. We're considering the fact that you untied the top. That's good enough. Now, again, when you're placing it on the sukkah, it subsequently, okay, that problem over there is you can't place a bundle of wood. If a bundle of wood was placed on a sukkah, not for the intention of schach, for drying out, that's the problem, right? Because it wasn't intention for shade. Here, I am placing this with the intention for sukkah. So therefore, and we said in the Mishnah, if you untie something, it's okay if you're placing it for the purpose of sukkah, right? You take a bundle, that's what you're supposed to do. The Mishnah says even if you placed it tied with the intention of schach, you just have to untie it, right? So you place it for the intention of schach. Well, what's the chiddush over here? The chiddush over here is that even though it's tied on the bottom, you can still take this and throw it on top of the sukkah. So the obvious question is, why isn't it a problem? It should be a problem of it's still tied. That's going to be the Gemara's question. You see in the picture, it's tied on the top and it's tied on the bottom. So okay, we have to see if that's going to make a difference. But the Gemara's question is, at this point, this item resembles a bundle. So why is it good enough? You're right. If it's tied on top and the bottom, you said you can't go ahead and use it as schach. If it's tied on the top and the bottom. But if it went ahead and you untied the top, then you can go ahead and take this and throw it on top of the sukkah. But why? It's still tied and it resembles a bundle. And if it resembles a bundle, we should be afraid that you might have a sukkah but you place the bundle to dry. And if you're going to use this bundle, you're going to allow that bundle. If it resembles a bundle, that's going to be the Gemara's question. The Gemara says, "V'hagidi matatay." So when you hear the Gemara's question, it's tied on the bottom. If it's tied on the bottom, so it should still be a problem of a bundle. So why are you allowed to go ahead and take this and put it on top of the sukkah? So the Gemara answers, Amar Papa, Ishari Lahu. You untied the bottom. What it means is, you see the way it's braided on the bottom, you went ahead, you untied it, but you left, it's no longer tied, but you left the braid. It's still braided on the bottom. There's still that string going around, but it's no longer tied. So they are connected. So the chiddush is, since they're not actually tied, it's like you have something, sometimes you have, let's say you have your shoes and you untie the knot, right? So the laces, it could still be, the laces are still there, they're not, but it's not tied anymore. Then it could just opens up. So that's what happened. But until it opens up, until you move it around until it opens up, it's technically not tied, but it's technically, let's say the thing is still in some sort of formation. So that's what happened over here. This is still in some sort of formation on the bottom because you just untied the end, but it's still holding a certain amount. So that's the chidush. The chidush is that that's not called a bundle, since it's technically untied on the bottom. The Gemara says that's Rav Papa. Rav Huna b'reid Rabbi Yeshua. He says afilu tema de lo sharilu. Even if you say that you did not untie the top of that string on the bottom that ties it together, still it's fine. Why is it still fine? Why can I still use it if it's still technically tied on the bottom? So it says, Kol eged she'ena osula tato. This any type of tying that was not tied to go ahead, you're not able, it wasn't tied together for, we want you to carry it. You tied it together in order to carry it. The reason why you tied it together on the bottom was just to keep the heads of the branches of the willow uniform. The thing shouldn't stick out. And if you're going to go ahead and if you're going to carry it as is, the bottom knot is going to fall off. It's going to loosen up because since you had already opened the top, knot, right? You left the bottom knot tied. So if you're going to go in and carry it, what will happen? Because the top knot is open, it's not going to, you won't be able to carry it any real distance in this formation of information, because it will just slip out. The things will come out of the bundle. So that's not called the real bundle. They have to be really concerned. That's not the bundle that a person stores away for drying purposes that you have to worry about. This type of bundle is not made because it doesn't resemble that type of bundle, and therefore we could go ahead and take this and place it on the schach. Okay, so the Gemara says, Amar Rav Abba Amar Shmuel, Yerokot she'amru chachamim. Now, the rabbi said there's certain yerokot, vegetables that you use for marar on Pesach, right? There's 5 different types of categories of marar that it says that you use on Pesach. So yerokot she'amru chachamim adam yotz b'chavos Pesach mevi'in es hatumah. These vegetables, now if you go ahead, now these vegetables, when they're moist, they remain whole, but when they dry out, so as a result of the drying out, they disintegrate, pieces fall off, and it becomes not whole, these vegetables anymore, once it gets dried out. So now if a person goes ahead and he takes these vegetables and he makes a little canopy, like sometimes you see people make flowers, they have a canopy made out of flowers at a wedding, the canopy made out of flowers. A person places a canopy made out of these vegetables, these leaves, these romaine lettuce, and they go ahead and they make some sort of canopy over, let's say, there was a person who had passed away, and there was a certain amount, let's say, and they put, let's say, a certain amount over the person who passed away, placed this canopy of vegetables over this person who passed away, and on one side was the dead body that he was covering. On the other side of this canopy of vegetables, there was something underneath. There was other food or other utensils. So the general rule is when you have a tent, and the tent there's a ceiling that covers a person who passed away. So then not only that, then anything that's under that tent also will become, under that ceiling would also become contaminated. Just like anybody in the room would come contaminated. Because you're under one ceiling, just like you have a tree. There's a tree in a cemetery going over the graves in the cemetery on one side, and then the same branches or something is going over. If that same cover is extending over further out, if it's the same cover, is covering both a person who's alive and a person who passed away. So then that person who's alive also becomes contaminated because he's under that same ceiling, that thing that protrudes. So here the Gemara is saying, if you have this canopy of vegetables, of these yerokos, of these that are used for Pesach, if there is a person on one side who passed away and something else on the other side underneath this canopy, that it has the ability to bring contamination to that other. It will bring contamination. It will serve as a ohel, as a tent. So the first halacha, mevi'in es hatumah. If it would bring tumah to the other side, and the ein chosesin. Now, even though these vegetables are very thin, so the chidush is that even though they're very thin, they still serve as a tent because they're still a cover. It doesn't make a difference. It seems how thin the cover that's above the dead body is. It even such material that's very thin, it will still serve as a tent. Now, the Gemara continues. Ve'ein sin b'fnei hatumah. Now, we have a halacha that if, let's say, there's a tent, and above the tent, let's say, and there's a dead body in the tent, anything that's above the tent, the law is that tent caps is like a cap. It caps the contamination, that the tumah does not go higher up. Meaning to say, a cemetery, because there's no cap on top of the grave, meaning the person's buried on the, and then so this contamination technically goes all the way to the heaven. It can go a million miles up. There's nothing that's stopping. There's nothing that capped that contamination, because there was no ohel, there was no tent that went over the body that stopped the contamination that contained it. So here, this type of vegetable, since it dries out and parts of the vegetable fall away, it disintegrates. So we're afraid that it's not going to act as a proper tent, because it's going to have a hole in the ceiling of this tent. Because at a later date, this vegetable will disintegrate, parts of it will fall off. And therefore, we're going to be strict, and we're going to say this is not going to cap. The Rabbanan are going to say that even when it's moist, even when this vegetable is in the moist stage, when it's moist, it's not full, it's whole, it's not falling off, it's not disintegrating. But because of the concern that if you're going to use this as a cap, then you're going to make a mistake to think that it's a good cap when it is already dried out. Or you're going to use it as a cap when it dried out, and really when it dries out, it's no longer a cap because there's holes within this cover. So therefore, it says ve'ein chosesin b'fnei hatumah. It doesn't act as a chatzitza. It doesn't act as a
separation
between the dead body and anything above the dead body. What do you say? These five vegetables. More. I mean, it can't be used. It can't cap the right. If a person wants,
it can't be used as a tent. Cannot be used as a tent.
Contamination, it can't use as a cap. What do you say?
I said it can't be used as a tent cover.
Right, it can't be used as a tent cover to cap a contamination. But if it was used as a tent cover, we're going to be strict to say that it did bring contamination. It's going to serve as a tent to bring contamination to the other side, because on a Torah level, it's definitely when it's moist, it's definitely a real tent. It's definitely a cover. And therefore, if it's a cover, it definitely will bring contamination to the other side. Now, yes, that's I'm saying that's that. Even today, there are certain places that Ocean Parkway in Brooklyn that Kohanim don't go to because it's a tree from the cemetery.
The tree goes part of the cemetery.
Queens also, there are places in Queens have this also. Issues that the Kohanim are aware. If you're a Kohen, the morning boys, if you're a Kohen, you'll be aware of certain places in Queens and in Brooklyn. Say it again. General, when we go to a cemetery, we just wash our hands, right, left, after we go to a cemetery. But a Kohen cannot allow himself to become contaminated. So therefore, Kohen, there's a prohibition to become contaminated. Therefore, he would not be able to walk on that spot, on that block, on that where tree is going from the cemetery over both it's serving as a tent over the cemetery and also over the street where it protrudes. So that's something that the Kohanim are aware of. So we say over here, uposlim b'sukkah mishum avir. And the next thing we say is that it invalidates a sukkah. Because you can ask the question, what does this have to do with Masechta Sukkah? Because it has a very important halacha regarding if a person, there's something called schach that's not kosher, right?
Right.
These vegetables are not kosher schach. Because the vegetables are, let's say, they're mekabel tumah. They're mekabel tumah. They're a food, and a food that's mekabel tumah, a food cannot be used as schach. So usually, we have a law that says there's a certain size of amount of not kosher schach that could ruin the sukkah, that has the ability to cut the sukkah in half, that you lost, that it's no longer one sukkah, it breaks the sukkah in half. If a person has not kosher schach, or an area, if you have 4 tfachim of, if you have, let's say, 15 inches by 15 inches or so of not kosher schach in the sukkah, you wouldn't be able to sit under that spot. And not only that, if let's say you have from the center wall, let's say the center wall of the sukkah, you have not kosher schach going from one end of the sukkah to the other end of the sukkah. Let's say if a balcony would be one of the walls. And let's say the sukkah would only have 3 walls. Wall number 1 to my right, wall number 2 to my left, and wall number 3 in balcony. And I have schach, I have proper schach. I had proper schach on this side and this side, but in the middle, in the center, I had 4 tfachim of not kosher schach that ran through the whole sukkah. I had on the right side and the left was kosher schach, but in the middle was not kosher schach. How much not kosher schach did I have in the middle? I had, let's say I had 15 inches wide, and it went all across, it went throughout the whole sukkah. So we say if you have 4 tfachim of not kosher schach that goes throughout the sukkah, it splits the sukkah. It's no longer, it disconnects this side from that side. And therefore, what happens is now I only have 2 walls on the right. I have the wall, the half of the wall that's left, because I had 4 tfachim of not kosher schach here. It breaks this wall. Now this wall is 2 halves of wall. Therefore, it's as if I have 1 wall on that side plus only 1 wall on that side. 1 wall on that side, so I only have 2 walls on each side. It's not a kosher sukkah. If I began with 3 walls only, if I began with 4 walls, then I have that 3rd wall that could go. That's all provided that the interior has 7 tfachim by 7 tfachim. But then I would be left with I would be left with 3 walls if I originally started with 4 walls. But if I started with 3 walls, I'm left with only 2 walls if the not kosher schach goes all the way. That's if it's not kosher schach. But if it's an air space of empty space in the sukkah, in the middle of the sukkah, I got empty space that goes 3 tfachim, let's say 11 inches, goes throughout the whole sukkah, empty space, that also splits the sukkah. That also knocks out that this is no longer connected, that it disconnects. And therefore it would also be 2 walls on this, 2 walls on this side. So the Gemara says, since this disintegrates, it loses some of its, when it dries out, it loses its pieces, it becomes holy or holes. We consider if you would actually put this covering on the sukkah, we would treat it not like not kosher schach, which you have up to 4 tfachim. We would treat it like airspace, but you only get up to 3. If you have 3 tvachim already with a validator. So we'll see a little bit more tomorrow. We'll get a little bit more details on this halacha. I want to thank everybody for being here.
Thank you, Rabbi. Have a great day.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you. All the best, everybody.
Great day, guys.